So I'll get a little bit into the distinction between the two, Ingram River and Island Lake, a little bit further on. But this will just be kind of a brief overview of the work that we've been doing there over the years, what designation has meant for the area, and the Ingram River Wilderness Area campaign continuing and what that looks like. So just a little bit about the background of the organization that I work for, in case any of you are not familiar with it. Since 2003, the St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship Association is focused on the responsible stewardship of the St. Margaret's Bay watershed. The Ingram and Indian River watersheds make up a large portion of that, and that's kind of where we more or less set some of the boundaries for what became Ingram River Wilderness Area proposal and campaign. How that kind of started a long time ago, I won't go into the full background, but we've more or less been working on issues related to that since 2003. But kind of the evolution of that really got a bit of a jump start in 2010, 2011, when we led the campaign that was called at the time Buy Back the Mersey, to buy what was at that point private land being sold. We led the campaign for the provincial government to purchase that land from the closing, what was at that point Abitibi Bowater, and owned by Resolute Forest Products based out of Quebec. And so a large portion of that land was going from private hands into some other private owner, and we wanted to make sure that the province bought it and it became public land. So we were heavily involved in that. We had pitched a community forest at that point. It was rejected. And then as time went on, we saw the area was not really getting the type of consultation that was meaningful that we would like to see. We had done a lot of work to document forestry values and ecological values. And then we kind of saw that there wasn't really much listening to community as to how those public lands were treated. To a point where actually I interviewed quite a lot of people that sat on the Bowater Mersey Advisory Committee for kind of when that committee was under Bowater and privately owned versus the public process. And they actually said that when it was a lot better and more transparent when it was under Bowater. So we were getting a little more and more concerned with kind of the amount of clear cutting that we were seeing in the area. So Jeff LeBoutelier and I kind of in 2015 started to draw together what a campaign for getting additional protections for the area would look like. And I've been working on it those 9 years ever since. Jeff kind of took a step back in about 2016. And I've been struggling ever since. So here's a bit of a map. Probably should have thought about bringing a pointer, but you can kind of see at the bottom there just some identifiers for, if you know the area where Upper Tantalon is, that's the 103 as you kind of go along the south shore. For those of you who are kind of quite familiar with wilderness areas around this part of the province, you can see in the bottom right is the Five Bridge Lake Wilderness Area on the Chebucto Peninsula. And then on the far left or to the west, you can see the South Panook Wilderness Area. The purple is Panook Lake Nature Reserve along Panook Lake. And then the kind of 3-parcel nature reserve is Old Annapolis Nature Reserve. And then the wilderness area in the yellow on the top right is Pokwak. So you can kind of get a bit of bearings there for the land and the layout. This is actually kind of an iteration that came after a couple of years of work. Originally, it was a fair bit larger, but we scaled it down. The kind of salmon colored or orange colored that you see there is what is the St. Croix or St. Croix Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative. So we partnered with them in late 2016, early 2017 to advocate for their community forest and for them to support our wilderness area. Because originally our proposal did include a bunch of lands over there that had some overlap, but then we just kind of heard through the grapevine that their proposal was moving ahead and we didn't want to have conflicting proposals. So we immediately partnered with them, cut our proposal in half, and we became advocates for one another and had really great partnerships to identify ecologically significant areas, kind of building on what was said earlier with the distinction between old growth forest, old forest. The way that I often frame it is forests of high conservation value, because you kind of can't really put a strict definition on that, whereas old growth forest does usually have a pretty strict definition. It's got a definition in provincial policy, and there's the old forest scoring protocol that you can use to kind of vote with somebody trying to.
Yes.
Oh no, I think Charles is answering the phone call. So it's one for
Yes.
high conservation
Okay,
value.
can you hang on for a second?
Oh, I'm just gonna mute this one here so it's not coming through. High forests of high conservation value, it doesn't really matter how old it is. So that's kind of an important qualifier that I think we all need to consider for achieving conservation values and goals in Nova Scotia, is that it doesn't really matter if it's a certain age or not. So Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative was really great to work with us on all the areas that we had identified species at risk or species of conservation concern and high conservation value forests, and kind of said, we'll work with you to make sure those values are upheld. And they subsequently, the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq actually did write a very glowing letter of support for the designation of what you see in green here, the broader Ingram River Wilderness Area, which we feel very honored that they were willing to do that. So what remains of this area, I'll get into Island Lake a little bit more. This broader area that you see in dark green is not including the purple, is a little over 15,000 hectares, about 15,380 hectares. And Old Annapolis Nature Reserve is about 450 hectares or so. So there's just a little bit of overlap there. Oh, there we go. So this is just one of the, well, it's kind of a little washed out, but you kind of get the idea. Hopefully you can kind of see some of the lakes that are in a similar position to the last map. And then this is just one of the GPS platforms that I use, that you can see the amount of work that we've put into this. This wasn't kind of an arbitrary decision. This was after years, many years of work, of field work conducting for lichen surveys, species at risk surveys, old forest surveys. And this is all the data that we've been accumulating over that kind of 9-year period. And then when you zoom in, you can see that there's quite a few waypoints in some of those areas that you kind of can't really tell how many there. We've got in the ballpark of about 2,000 points of data that we've collected over the span of that time for this area. And then you can kind of really see just kind of how the overlap of where we came to this design, and that why we kind of didn't occupy some of the areas more in kind of this region, because a lot of this had been clear cut recently and we didn't find as many values there. So this is what the proposal originally looked like. And it's a fair bit different than what it looks like now. So you can see that these are the lands kind of north of the Halifax-Hants County line that we've just kind of excised from our proposal. And then in this area here around Big St. Margaret's Lake, and then another triangle that kind of came in here were ones that I added to our map because I found some really, really high conservation value forests. And within that kind of broader area is also the oldest documented forest in the Maritimes. So it's something that we knew needed to be included within our proposal. We also, it's one of the higher concentration areas for species at risk and old forests in general that we found in Nova Scotia, but especially in this area. So it's definitely needed to be included. So we needed to change the proposal again to both lose some areas as well as add some new ones. And we got Mike Savage, you can see down here, the Mayor of Halifax, to issue a quote. I know this is a little blurry, but this brochure is pretty outdated anyways. So that was kind of the broader Ingram River Wilderness Area. To say that campaign's been going on for about 9 years now. I knew that when we started it, I was kind of engaging in something that might take me 20 years to complete. So I'm not too pessimistic that I've been working on it for as long as I have. I plan on continuing to do it until it's done. But Island Lake Wilderness Area does represent a really great step forward in the protection of the area. It's not everything that we were looking for. It constitutes about 25%. It's a little over that, a little over a quarter of the broader Ingram River Wilderness Area. As Bob said earlier, it's just under 4,000 hectares. So if you recall, we were 15,300 is kind of roughly the total area. So it's a good chunk for sure. You don't want to kind of turn your nose up at 4,000 new hectares of protected area in Nova Scotia. Definitely a victory. I try to keep telling myself that so I don't focus on kind of the work ahead, but I want to celebrate this victory as much as we can, because it's a really great thing. It's only the second time in Nova Scotia that a protected area was designated that wasn't part of the Parks and Protected Areas plan. So that's a great thing. So this is the official map of Island Lake Wilderness Area. So it's quite narrow. It's very long. You can see kind of Island Lake in the center here. Originally, when they came to us with this proposal, they wanted to call it Ingram River Wilderness Area. And we said, that's kind of ridiculous because this is almost exclusively in the Indian River watershed, which is here. The Ingram River flows out through here. So there are some of these lakes are in the Ingram River watershed. And unfortunately, the wilderness area does protect about 3 kilometers of the main stem of the Ingram River. So it's a good start, but it's certainly not Ingram River Wilderness Area. So Island Lake kind of being right in the center, that's where it gets its name from. Unfortunately, there's probably in the ballpark of 30 or 40 island lakes across Nova Scotia, I think. So it's not a terribly unique or inspiring name, but that's not what we're here for. The ecological values are a lot of the conservation areas are in this area. There's one marsh in particular that we found in our work that has one field season we documented rusty blackbird, Canada warbler, and olive-sided flycatcher all in one marsh. So it's a really important bird area, and we've partnered with folks like Cindy Stacey from Dalhousie to do follow-up work there, and there's been a lot of documentation of some of those really significant wetlands there. And yeah, it's about I think it's about 13-ish kilometers from kind of the northern portion to the southern portion, and then it's not very wide. It's only about, I think at its widest point about 2 or 3 kilometers wide, but offers a lot of protection for obviously Island Lake, but also Sandy and Rafter Lake here, several small lakes, and enshrined in it is the use of a lot of these areas that you can see kind of are blacked out. These are either roads that are going to be used for Nova Scotia Power's infrastructure. They've got hydro systems on this lake system, or they're going to be used for recreational values, kind of a lot of these ones that kind of cut across, and you can see some of the qualifiers on the map here, identifying which routes are not going to be included in the wilderness area for ATV use. So a little bit more about Island Lake Wilderness Area. 3,937 hectares. Probably the most unique elements of it from kind of across the province are the red spruce dominant forest. So in the northern portions of the St. Margaret's Bay watershed, one of the things that we're most blessed with is that a lot of our forests naturally regenerate with red spruce dominance, which is not super common across the whole province. There's kind of only 2 areas of Nova Scotia that do that kind of predominantly, and that's kind of the North Shore, Amherst area, and north of St. Margaret's Bay. So it does mean that that's kind of inspired a fair amount of conflict for forestry values, because that's the species that is kind of most sought after for a lot of the lumbering mills. And that's where a lot of kind of targeted silvicultural investments have been over the years. So there's a fair bit of opposition from the forestry world for this area in particular, but arguably kind of for in recent probably past year or so, I think we've seen some kind of opposition to protected areas as a concept. So we're kind of looking to engage with that a little bit more so. And you can see pictured here is this is a red spruce dominant forest that is protected in Island Lake Wilderness Area. It's got some of the best red spruce old growth forests I've ever seen. You can kind of just see the size of some of these trees here. It's one of the most unique features that we have in the areas that you don't see a ton of red spruce dominant old growth forests in Nova Scotia. And one of the things that's kind of most interesting when you do access them is the physical vertical structure, because they're so tall and so straight that just having that kind of physical diversity of habitat is something that I think we don't often think about a ton. But when you go there, when you have a mind for kind of ecological conservation values, you kind of can, even if you don't necessarily consciously know it, you can kind of just know that it's different. Like the fact that you can see large distances and you can kind of picture how ideal of a habitat it would be for species like flying squirrel that need these kind of large open areas, that need mixed wood forests. It's ideal for species like that, and also for overwintering for moose. That's a big one, which we have documented in the area as well. And I've shown this picture in particular to lots and lots of people over the years, and I've always kind of really enjoyed the incredulity as to, like, I didn't think Nova Scotia had forests like that anymore. And it's always been kind of nice to see, both equally, I guess, depressing and nice. But I always say that one of the biggest challenges that we have in forest conservation in Nova Scotia is that a lot of Nova Scotians don't actually know what's out there. They don't know what they've been deprived of from our long history of kind of high rotational clear cutting and what that's done to our forests. Many Nova Scotians don't get to see many old growth forests, and if they do, it's kind of in a park setting like Kedzie or some of the other provincial parks. But to see kind of true wilderness old growth that doesn't really have much of any human influence or impact or even recreational impact, it's unfortunately less common. So I think that's a kind of part of the challenge that we need to face, is that a lot of Nova Scotians just kind of look around and say, okay, this is about as good as it gets, and it's good to me. But a lot of them unfortunately don't get to see what you see when you're out in the field all the time. So we've documented within Island Lake Wilderness Area, I think it's 43 sites that have old growth forest, and that is the provincial definition. Heard Alain's name mentioned earlier, Alain Beliveau. I do use what I call the Alain Beliveau test, where you just kind of determine if there's old forest indicator species of lichen, and then that's kind of good enough from an ecological standpoint, because the old forest scoring protocol is more of a kind of forestry based. It's like a volume based equation using basal area, for those of you who are familiar with that, rather than again that kind of conservation value. So, and one of these sites we documented, there were several trees over 400 years. The oldest one was 412 years old, and that is within Island Lake Wilderness Area. So that's a really nice victory to have as well. That kind of puts it among the top tier in the province, because we've got, the numbers are always hard to kind of have people settle on, but pretty much everybody agrees that we have less than 1% of our old growth forest remaining in Nova Scotia. The lower end of that, I've seen people say as low as 0.4%. But that's when you use the metric of kind of the 125 year is the rough window to pass or fail an old growth forest. So that's kind of the equivalent of calling a 25-year-old a senior citizen, right? Like our hemlocks can get 500 years if we let them, even older. In other parts of the range, they can get 600 years old, same with the yellow birch. So the fact that our bar is kind of being lowered so much that it's 125 years old, I don't even know what the percentage would be for forests that are over 400 years old in Nova Scotia. It's got to be 0.000 something. I've never seen that number quantified. In Island Lake Wilderness Area, we've documented 9 species at risk, and that's just the minimum. Those are just the ones that we've documented. So that's common snapping turtle, Canada warbler, rusty blackbird, olive-sided flycatcher, blue felt lichen, common nighthawk, barn swallow, bank swallow, and monarch butterfly, as well as over 30 species of conservation concern. Some people use the term SOCI, species of conservation interest. I like SOCs myself. Part of the work, the culmination of kind of this many years of work and the government saying, okay, eventually, yes, we'll protect something, kind of stop pestering us. There was also an expansion to South Pinook Wilderness Area. So that was the existing wilderness area that I had highlighted on the map earlier. After the expansion, the total now for that is 7,192 hectares. And the expansion that was the result of our work was for 349 hectares. Not a huge amount, but not nothing. It did protect some pretty significant areas. There's a lot of values that we documented in that area. Some really beautiful. This is a photo of some of them. There's some really nice mixed wood forests, kind of what you'd really like to see as the climax Wabanaki or Acadian old growth ecosystem. You can kind of see the red spruce in here on the side here. I think this is also red spruce, but there's a lot of hemlock in the stand. You can see some sugar maple in the background, yellow birch in kind of the middle background. So just kind of the ideal mix of old climax species, where it was just kind of, this photo, it looks like it's mostly deciduous dominant, but you can kind of tell that that's just that portion when you kind of look from where the photograph is taken. It's coniferous, and then the regen is coniferous as well. So it's one of the best examples that I've ever seen, where it just has this perfect mix of what we're supposed to be in the Wabanaki system. And it's quite a bit smaller, so we don't have as many old growth sites there. We had 5 with some of the trees reaching over 300 years old, and 5 species at risk. So that's Canada warbler, olive-sided flycatcher, common nighthawk, and I documented a chimney swift there back in 2020, which we were very surprised to see. But we both kind of looked at each other and confirmed you heard that too, right? And 10 species of conservation concern. So it's all in a relatively small area. It's a little bit less impressive numbers than some of the broader area. So I already went over this. I kind of jumped the gun on that, but I didn't touch too much on the fact that a big part of the work that we've done there over the past, I guess that's 8 years, is to try to restore the aquatic habitat. So we partner with the Nova Scotia Salmon Association and Adopt Stream program to undertake multi-year efforts to restore the Ingram and Indian River systems for salmonid species. So we've done a lot of things like installation of digger logs, consolidation of channels that have been altered through log drives that happened as much as like 100-ish years ago, but the legacy of that kind of continues until you do some physical restoration efforts. So we've undertaken, we'll be entering our ninth season of physical restoration efforts within the Ingram and Indian River watersheds this year. So a little bit about the broader area. So after the designation of Island Lake Wilderness Area and South Panook expansion, it means that there's about 11,000 hectares of the area that remains unprotected. And we've, over that long period of time, garnered quite a lot of support from businesses and as well as non-governmental organizations, including the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, as I said earlier, the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. And when you add up kind of all their membership, it's well over 30,000 combined members. That would actually be kind of closer to 50,000, I think now. I wrote this slide maybe about a year ago, so I should update that. But the fact that it's kind of such a large diversity of support speaks to the strength of this campaign. It's something that has been identified for a really long time as being a significant area. Going to go back to, I think, I don't have a map coming up. So you can see here, and with our other map here, Panook Lake on kind of the western side, it's the one that kind of has that kind of upturn at the bottom. It's the longest lake in the province, and it's quite an interesting feature, but what it kind of means is that it presents a bit of a barrier for terrestrial migration kind of east and west across the province, especially for animals that kind of need ecological connectivity. And it means that there's kind of a bottleneck effect for everything that's going to be navigating kind of through east and west across Nova Scotia. It's going to need to go either north or south of Panook Lake. And there's a pretty narrow band on either side of it. So it means that those strips of land that separate Panook Lake from St. Margaret's Bay and then Panook Lake from the Bay of Fundy have quite a large significance in terms of that ecological corridor connectivity that they need to function as. So places like this have kind of a lot more benefit than their area might suggest. Kind of this, if you preserve 1,000 hectares somewhere else, then if you protect it on those corridors, then they're going to have that much more of an impact in sites like this. So it's like we've partnered with groups like the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society that they include it in their annual reports kind of every year on the federal level that this is a significant area. They had identified it before we began to work on it, and then they just kind of continued to work with us afterwards. And we've had a lot of support from them over the years to help identify some of those ecologically significant areas and do a lot of our field work. So they're a great partner that we've had. One of the kind of best arguments that we always have is that the St. Margaret's district, which it's often referred to as kind of the areas that were bought from Bowater, is actually underserved in terms of protection. When you break it up into eco districts across the province, that kind of changes. But if any of you are kind of really familiar with either of the areas, the eco districts are not done on kind of a refined enough filter for me to be comfortable with as somebody who knows some of these areas really deeply. And Beth, I know you know a bunch of these, that within our eco district, the Chebucto Peninsula is the same eco district as north of St. Margaret's Bay, which they're wildly different. Like so much of the Chebucto Peninsula, there's not a lot of fertile soils, there's not a lot of old forests, there's a lot of scrublands, there's a lot of broom crowberry barrens, which are very important, but they're also very different than the red spruce dominant forests of the northern portions of the St. Margaret's Bay watershed. So it's when you kind of zoom out to use that filter of kind of parsing out the ecological significance, the St. Margaret's district, which is north of St. Margaret's Bay, is quite underserved for protection. It's even after the designation of Island Lake and the expansion of South Panook, we're still under the provincial average of 30% of public land is protected across Nova Scotia, roughly. And if you designate the rest of Ingram River Wilderness Area, it'll bring us in keeping with that provincial average. So we're not kind of asking for above and beyond. We're just asking for what the rest of the province has on average. So there's a lot of other arguments that are going for us. We've got the area, if you follow the Mainland Moose Recovery Plan, the area is pretty heavily featured as part of the core habitat. It almost overlaps directly. I'll go to that, I think, in a future slide. In the total area, we've observed 17 species at risk that I haven't mentioned today. So it's a further 8 that I didn't mention yet, and a total of 36 species of conservation concern. And perhaps one of the more kind of popular elements is that we've got the oldest forest documented in the Maritimes. You may have seen the CBC article that came out about that maybe 2 or 3 years ago. DNRR never kind of really mentions that it's part of a community proposed wilderness area. And but we generally don't kind of share exactly where it is, but it's within our proposed wilderness area. And myself and again, Alain had the privilege of documenting that area in 2020. That was quite an amazing trip. I've got some photos of it that I'll share later. And we've got multiple sites where we've documented forests where there's trees over 400 years old. So the oldest forest in the Maritimes has trees that the oldest tree would now be 534 years old, which is unheard of. But we have multiple sites where the trees are 400 years old. And in total, we've documented over 100 old forest sites. So this is the map for the mainland moose recovery plan. And you can kind of see what's identified in the solid black line there was what was identified as core moose habitat. And you can see this kind of like the large chunk in the west, the large chunk in the east, and then the large chunk in kind of the North Shore area. And all those areas where you can kind of have that narrowing mean that they're very important for reducing fragmentation. That's always been known to be one of the bigger limiting factors for moose habitat and encroachment upon kind of areas that are intact, infiltration of white-tailed deer, infiltration of hunters and any other kind of disturbing elements to them. And you can also see, obviously, that one of the metrics that they used to determine the core habitat was the presence of public land, because it was going to be a lot easier for the government to enact conservation measures on land that it kind of owns in title. So you can see that kind of in our area right here, like this is basically where Ingram River Wilderness Area is proposed. So you can kind of see there without it. And then with it here, like it's in one of those pinch points that is very significant. And you can't see it on this map, but Chinook Lake kind of runs right here. It's very long and again, kind of, it's not super wide. I think at its widest point, it's about a little under a kilometer, but it's enough to be a barrier for species like flying squirrel that I mentioned earlier. Like they're not going to be kind of running across that. Even if it's frozen, and they're certainly not going to be swimming across it. And that kind of connectivity is something that Nova Scotia struggles with, as I'm sure you all know. And it's one of the bigger challenges that we have. I feel like I've mentioned Alain's name many times, but this might be the last time. 2 years ago, yeah, it'll be 2 years ago this May. Him, myself, Jonathan Riley, which some of you may know, brilliant man for lichens as well, and Chris Kennedy kind of endeavored to show just how short this is. And we started canoeing right about here at the mouth of the St. Croix, and then we canoed all the way down to St. Margaret's Bay in kind of a marathon style. Just to show that's how small this area is and how kind of fragile Nova Scotia is, that you can canoe across it in one day at this narrow pinch point. It's the narrowest point, kind of not including the Chignecto Isthmus and kind of some of these areas, I assume, kind of around that. But for the rest of the province, this is one of the biggest pinch points. And our route was, I think, about 60 kilometers that we did, and we did it in just under 16 hours. To kind of show that's something that we need to take seriously. And so you can kind of see again, like just kind of going back to that, we're right here. This is what we're looking at for Ingram River Wilderness Area proposal. And there's some of the moose poop that we found. I'm sure I'm not discussing this crowd. I'm sure everybody's as interested as I am to see that. We've got quite a few sites where we found moose, and there's a few concentration areas that unfortunately remain unprotected. And we're hoping that's going to help in getting protection in the future. We're in a really good place in general on paper for conservation to advance in Nova Scotia with the Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act. It's a relatively short window to achieve a lot of progress, right? We've got, as I'm sure you know, by 2030, the province legally has to protect 20% of the province's lands and waters. Right now we sit around 14. So that translates to about 300,000 hectares of new protected area. And for kind of comparison, that's the equivalent of about 6 Kedron-Kujiks. So there's a lot of ground to be made up, and not a lot of time to do it in. There's the provincial goals just say for the interim targets that by 2026 that we need to get to, I believe it's 15%. But the federal funding that we got for that is actually contingent upon March 31st, 2026. So it's actually a fairly short window to achieve what would be the equivalent of about 80,000 new hectares of protected area by about 2 years' time. That's likely to come in the way of expansion of existing protected areas rather than new designations because of all the kind of barriers that come with new designations. But we're hopeful that they'll continue to expand a lot of the areas across the province, and we're hoping that South Pembroke Wilderness Area as well as potential Island Lake will be targeted for future expansion. It's an area that we've always really promoted as being a great opportunity for the balance of kind of tourism values, recreation values, and ecological values, because there's a lot of kind of infrastructure there that's good for development as a trail. We've proposed a hiking trail. There's the canoe route that we talked about that takes you from the Bay of Fundy to St. Margaret's Bay. I would generally wouldn't recommend that for the faint-hearted or people that haven't been doing a lot of training to kind of get into good shape to do that. It was very more mentally tough and grueling than anything because we needed to start kind of super early in the morning. We started at about 1 a.m. in the morning and kind of went through the night. If you do it on a, like, I'm thinking about it as though you need to do a marathon too. Even if you don't do it as a marathon, it's not leisurely canoeing. It's kind of high skill, pretty demanding and very technical. The Ingram River is kind of not the same areas that you can kind of canoe down at leisurely and at your own pace. It's lots of rapids, lots of difficult portaging, and lots of fun if you like that kind of thing. But if you're kind of up for more of a more restful trip, then that's not the one you're looking for. But we've also got areas that we've mapped out that you could do that route as a walking trail over a period of about 3-4 days to, again, kind of cross the province, hiking from the Bay of Fundy to St. Margaret's Bay. So we're kind of trying to use it as a bit of an example for across the province. We're not really taking advantage of some of the infrastructure that we have, some of the opportunities that we have to help to make Nova Scotia a great place to live for everybody who's already here, but also to promote it as a place that kind of global citizens that can live anywhere in the world. We want to attract those types of people that they want to be in Nova Scotia, and that's things like that are a great way to improve quality of life. So we're really trying to sell that. Please don't develop and clear cut some of these areas because this is what we'll be missing out on. It's been a really interesting journey to get into the ecosystem services element. I'm sure many of you know my friend Dale Prest, who's very much into that, and my fiance did her master's in ecosystem services. So just to kind of see the economic quantification of some of those things that are a little bit less tangible has been really interesting process in making arguments for this campaign. So Island Lake Wilderness Area alone, I crunched the numbers to give to some of our politicians so they could kind of say we did this. Island Lake Wilderness Area alone, when I ran it through the calculations for how much carbon that will sequester, it's basically the entire district 13 of HRM, which is about 16-ish thousand people. So it kind of gives you a bit of a picture as to how much we can value protected areas for their carbon sequestration capabilities, their particulate matter sequestration and improving air quality, water management, all the elements that kind of are somewhat difficult to harness as a tangible. With this campaign, we've tried to say this is what we're not going to be benefiting from on an ongoing basis if we clear cut this area. So for the broader Ingram River Wilderness Area, the very conservative estimate for what we came to on that was about $18 million a year, every year. And on the high end, it was in the ballpark of about $100 million a year. And I usually go more towards the conservative side on that. So somewhere in the ballpark of $20 million a year, every year in ecosystem services generated by that, by leaving it alone. So whenever we're kind of working on protected area campaigns, inevitably there'll be some kind of folks that will say, like, what about the money that you're losing by not exploiting the resources? That's kind of the counter that we like to bring. I remember a few years ago, the Mining and Minerals Association of Nova Scotia wrote an article in the Chronicle Herald saying, Nova Scotia is losing $22 million a year by not mining protected areas. And I immediately thought, yeah, but we're gaining like a couple of $100 million a year. So maybe losing that 20 million is not a big deal. So we need to we haven't done a good enough job, I think, in the conservation world to say this, because a lot of us are kind of apprehensive to do so. But I think we kind of need to get comfortable with saying this is the dollar value of this and take that seriously, because you're going to be paying for this out of pocket if you don't. And I think we're starting to see that more and more in Nova Scotia with, seems like every year now, especially last year, we had what, 3 1-in-100-year storms or kind of weather events over the course of a year. And it's those are the costs of not having adequate conservation measures in place. So as I said, I keep on trying to tell myself as well as others to kind of celebrate Island Lake Wilderness Area, the expansion of South Pinoak Wilderness Area. These are really big victories. We've found a lot of really great ecological values there that we should be very proud, both kind of supporters of the broader campaign as well as us for kind of leading that charge. I hope to kind of ride on the success for as long as I can and help it to keep me optimistic in the face of a lot of adversity that you face with these types of campaigns. So I'm trying to kind of just get everybody, and the Nova Scotia Wildflower Society is a supporter, I believe, of as well as Halifax Field Naturalists of the campaign. So that's your victory too, right? If you wrote a letter or even just having your organization's name attached to it, those all help, right? To when you have your meetings with government to say this is not just us saying this. This is a province-wide thing. So that's your victory too. And we're trying to get some of these reports that the government did on the process that have never been made public. There was a process that was called the biodiversity assessment that was finished in 2022. That included some public consultation that was on the broader area, not just Island Lake. That has never been made public, so we're trying to pressure that to happen. And the results of the public survey have never been released, so we're hoping that comes out soon. And kind of in keeping with what was talked about earlier with the pause on all old forests or high conservation value forests, we're asking for a pause on the proposed area in general to initiate a process. We are not thinking, like, we would obviously prefer to get the whole area protected, but we know the compromise is going to occur with that kind of process. But what we don't like to see is what happened just a couple of days ago. 400 acres of our proposal was put up for harvest on the Harvest Plans Map Viewer, the government source for proposing to the public these are areas that are going to be harvested. So it kind of speaks to what's not happening with areas like this and proposals like ours across and others across the province, is that we're in kind of a place where we're backed into a corner and having to react very reactively rather than proactively, being able to meet with industry representatives to kind of say, where can we find a compromise? It means that we're having to kind of combat stuff like this. And it just makes it a really unshaky ground, and it produces unnecessary conflict where it doesn't need to be. I didn't speak earlier, but Beth, who's known me for years, knows this about me. My background is in forestry. So there's a fair amount of kind of, I'll call them more like status quo forestry types that would see what we're doing and see me as anti-forestry. It's certainly not the approach that we're taking. It's that things are kind of out of balance across the province. We've had many reports over many years, Lay report kind of being some of the most recent, to talk about how we're out of whack, and efforts to have additional conservation are how we bring that into more balance. So to me, this is pro-ecological forestry. And the only reason that I'm not kind of still working full-time in that field is because there's not a lot of opportunities to do the type of forestry that I wanted to do in Nova Scotia. There's a little bit more so as soon as you get kind of further west, but in Nova Scotia, unfortunately, there's not a lot. So we're looking for a pause on those areas. And if you want to engage in that process, I would highly recommend it. It can be frustrating to engage with the Harvest Lands Map Viewer and comment on proposed harvests, but we have not done yet for these. But if you look on the map and go to that, you'll be able to see them just north of St. Margaret's Bay. And one of the things that's kind of most unfortunate, as somebody who's engaged with those a lot over the years, is that the way that data can be dismissed, in that we've also documented the olive-sided flycatcher within that kind of almost immediate area. Again, I think that one was about 250 meters outside of the polygon, but it's part of an area that has this broader usage and high conservation value. So it's one that we're hoping gets stopped and we can get to a better place where we're not having to fight these off one by one. So letters of support are always really helpful, especially when they're organic. politicians are going to put a lot more weight behind letters that are coming from your heart and that are not part of a template that people can send out. Because it kind of shows that it's something that you're truly that's truly important to you. It's not just something that you're kind of copy and pasting and then just sending right out. But when you just send your own letter of support, even if it's as brief as I support Ingram River Wilderness Area, I'd like to see harvest paused. I'd like to see additional conservation measures in this area. It doesn't really need to be kind of a highly scientific letter, just as long as it kind of conveys who you are, where your values are, and the fact that you support these things. That's kind of all it really needs to be. I think to some extent, I'm part of what I'm trying to do with this kind of tour that we've done. We've done some presentations for other groups, and we're going to have a few more in the next few months, is to kind of make people feel that much more optimistic with what we've been able to achieve through this campaign. As I said, it was only the second protected area to advance that was not part of the Parks and Protected Areas plan. And for the past like 8 years, I'm kind of getting used to tooting my own horn on this a little bit, but I'm hoping that it inspires others. This has mostly been me. This has mostly just been me working on this and making this happen. So it's through kind of generating that support, and then just from me kind of dedicating myself to this, it generated all the support that we got. So it included kind of quite a snowball effect that with me continuing to put my efforts into it, just the amount that we've seen that return in support from other groups like that, it's been really inspiring to see that you can get these kinds of victories if you kind of continue at them. So I'm hoping that kind of trying to own that, because I'm hoping that it inspires others to also do the same. And we are seeing more and more that I think more and more people like me in Newington kind of coming up across the province and dedicating themselves to working on places like the Goldsmith Lake area, how they're kind of fully dedicated to that. And I think with the place that we're in, I think there's a lot of room for a lot of champions to kind of have similar types of approaches that we've had over the next few years, where it's just a small group and just a small group of people that make these things happen. So never kind of take for granted that a letter of support is going to be meaningless, right? That kind of always feel like doing something is better than doing nothing. And sending these letters of support to Tim Houston, Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables, Tory Rushton, Environment and Climate Change, Tim Hallman. And the MLA for the majority of the area is Daniel Barkhouse. And she's been quite supportive of this. She's very open about it, and she wants to see it happen. And it just kind of helps to reaffirm that there's a lot of support out there for this. So even CCing her is good as well. But contacting your own MLA, especially if there's somebody that's in cabinet or if there's some caucus for the Conservatives, that's very beneficial. But even if there's somebody that's in opposition or the NDP as well, that's still going to be better than nothing. So never kind of think that it's not going to do anything. It's always helpful to do something. As I said, even if it's just 3 sentences saying that you support it, then that's going to help too. We've got a fair amount of information. Our website is a little out of date. I've kind of got it on my radar to update it this next month, but there's still lots of great information that's still relevant on our website, and that's protectingingram.com. And I can send that to Bob as well, just so we can send that around to everybody. And so just kind of I think the next little bit are all just nice photos, because I realized when I was making this presentation that I didn't have a lot. So maybe we'll just kind of go through any questions that anybody has about the area for the next little bit, and we'll kind of go over the photos then one by one. Yep. It's always challenging, and I empathize with the foresters on this one. As I said, that's my background. This time of the year is when you need to get well, it'll be too late for these ones, unfortunately, so I guess it doesn't really apply, but often you see a large chunk of harvest will be proposed in November to get them processed and through before the road closures, because I forget the exact, there's not really a peak throughout the year, right? I think it's just, I don't think you're going to see that happening, where it's kind of relatively consistent throughout the year when they propose that there isn't really a peak at any particular point of the year. What kind of stuck in my craw the most is that these things are always planned several years in advance. Yeah, that's where it's an issue for me. So a few years ago, I was asked to sit on what was called the Western Region Stakeholder Interaction Committee, which was kind of largely a way for the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables and West4 to engage with stakeholders as to how the next few years of harvests were going to go. This was this was relatively early in this campaign, but at that point I was already involved with the Healthy Forest Coalition.
Please, could you repeat the questions? Those of
Oh,
us on
sure.
Zoom can't hear them.
Maybe if you have a question, then folks can just come up to the microphone or come up to ask here. The question was, how do we kind of get around the issue that harvests are proposed to the public with really short periods of notice, and in the context of right now, anything that's proposed, it's going to be very difficult to get out into the field to perform ground truthing and data collection to make the arguments as to what conservation values are there and what might be lost if the area was harvested. So on this committee, I had to kind of fight to get a spot at all. And then when I was there, the former manager of Westfor, the position that he held, he had such kind of technical authority that he actually was able to disallow me from viewing the multi-year proposed harvest that they discuss in committees like that. And the committee got to a point where there was probably about maybe 40 or 50 people in that kind of virtual room. And a lot of the earlier meeting had kind of been talking about how the public has it wrong, like there's all this progress that's being made in forestry and the media treats us so unfairly. The public has these ill-informed opinions. How do we fix this? And I kind of took the opportunity in front of that group to say, like, I'm a forester, I have this background. I know that I'm seen as a threat because I advocate for conservation measures, but this is why the public doesn't trust you guys, is that I'm looking to want to engage. I'm here for compromise. I'm willing to do that. I know that we're going to have forestry. I even want us to have forestry, but there's areas where you have it and areas where you don't. And the fact that I was kicked out of that meeting in front of my peers, I use that as an opportunity to say this is what bothers us in the conservation community and hopefully the broader public. Of this is not how we do things. And I know as a forestry, you have long-term projections for what you hope to do in the years, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. You usually have as much as 5-10 years out of what you hope to harvest, even longer. Some, like, if you're doing it right, you'll have kind of decades ahead projection. So it's not reasonable that we continue to be stuck in this kind of conflict producing zone where it means that the public who have different opinions or different values have to rush to gain that data, to gain footing for a stable argument. And it's not fair. It creates both parties' backs are going to be against the wall, because the forestry companies are going to be saying, we got to get this through. We got to get this through. And then anybody who advocates for conservation, their back's up against the wall saying that I've got 40 days and I just got to the one that you proposed 40 days ago. And it's kind of this cycle of conflict that I think the Leahy report was trying to address. A lot of the pretty critical language in that. Like, I think it's one of the recommendations, like 40 something, where it says the Department of Natural Resources must deeply and pervasively embrace a culture of trust and transparency. I don't think that we're there yet. And that was 7 years ago. So there's a lot of ground to be made up, and there's a lot of dialogue that's not happening that could reduce those conflicts, but it's just not happening, unfortunately.
Mike, I'm here at home. It's
Yep.
Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi. I wondered about hemlock woolly adelgid. Is that a threat in this area? You talked about the hemlocks and yeah,
it certainly is. We haven't found it in the area. Obviously, it's in HRM, so it's kind of only a matter of time. We've partnered with Donna Crossland and the Medway Community Forest Co-op, and I've had meetings with Tim Hallman about how we can have some of these stands be on the radar. So the stands that are kind of over 400 years, and obviously the oldest one in the Maritimes is the ones that are kind of the key priorities for any kind of management. And we're looking at chemical treatments, which is something that I usually wouldn't feel comfortable with, but I kind of see it as the lesser of two evils. When you have a forest that's 400, 500 years old, if you lose that, the legacy is kind of 1,000-ish years to replace it, right? So the consequences of chemical treatments would not be quite as long. So it's something that we're thinking about a lot, and it's part of what we're kind of advocating. As the more that we can shift towards protection, a group like ours will not be putting a lot of resources into a protected areas campaign. We'd be more into a habitat restoration and management campaign around that, and we'd be able to focus our efforts on things like that rather than trying to get the area protected. So it's definitely a big challenge. We don't have a ton of hemlock dominant forests. They're definitely there, but that's kind of additionally one of the kind of pessimistic or perhaps realistic ways to look at this place is that red spruce dominant forests are the closest approximation that we're going to have for replacing hemlock, right? So it's one of the best areas to provide a similar habitat niche that is going to be in diminishing supply over the next few decades in the province. So
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Yep.
And do you hope to have some students again in the upcoming season?
Yeah, I'll have as many as we usually get, between 2 and 4 for our habitat restoration technicians who work on the physical stream restoration, and then we have usually 4 as well on the Bluff Trail doing our trail programs there.
Right. Thanks for your presentation. It was super.
Yeah, wait to see the photos. So this is a photo that we use a lot. It's a photo that I took in, I think, 2019 or 18. This is part of what's now Island Lake Wilderness Area. So it's a protected area. It's a very special place in my heart, and it's one of those places that I don't tell anybody where it is. I only take them to it. So let me know if you want to go. I'll take you there, but I won't tell you where it is. And this is just another one of those photos there that just kind of show the scale of what red spruce dominant forests are capable of in Nova Scotia. And yeah, I still love looking at this picture. I think I took this one in 2019 of an area that's now protected, luckily. And this yeah, some of these trees, for those of you kind of familiar with DBH measuring, the biggest one that we had was it was 96 centimeters DBH, so just under a meter in diameter. And that's another one that I've always kind of taken issue with, because it's with red spruce as well, just kind of the buttressing that happens and the fact that they do often grow on rocks. DBH doesn't always kind of give you a great image of that. This was the one that was 96 centimeters DBH. So those of you on Zoom might not be able to kind of give the scale of the tree versus me. I'm skinny, but I'm not a small person. Just to kind of give the size of the tree there. I tried to age it, but my increment bore was not big enough. So yeah, we didn't get an exact age, but it was at least I think it was 237 years old. And this is Island Lake of Island Lake Wilderness Area. And it's got kind of several major islands. This one here is quite big. It's about 30 acres. This one's a fair bit smaller. It's about, I think it's about 15 acres or so. And then there's another one kind of further here, like right now we're looking north into the photo, and then further south there's another island that's a little bit larger, about 35 acres or so. And then obviously lots of small little ones. Really beautiful place to explore. It's very oddly shaped, and it's got kind of lots of peninsulas, lots of coasts to explore. It does have quite a few cottages on it. You can kind of see some of that if you look close on the islands here. But a couple, the 2 biggest islands are entirely uninhabited and have no cottages on them, and they're really unique and interesting. And this is on the northern island here. And you can see just kind of how old, those of you who are familiar with kind of aging individual trees, especially hemlocks, once they start to get that color of gray, it's always a really good sign. They kind of, when they're very orange and very gray, those are the 2 good ones. And just kind of the amount of fissuring that occurs in the bark, and what I was mentioning earlier with that kind of diversity of physical structure, just how kind of tall they are. One of the things that you look for when you're assessing and documenting old forest sites is how high up the branches have been shaded off, because especially with a species like hemlock, if it's first kind of 24 feet, don't have any branches on that, it's a guarantee that it's been in a closed canopy situation for a very long time. This is a canoe trip down the Ingram River. So this is actually not Neither sides of the bank of this area will be protected. This is kind of a little bit too far north up the watershed. But really beautiful areas, a lot of it to canoe through. There's a couple areas that are a little bit more accessible to kind of every skill level, but you do need a bit of a high clearance vehicle to kind of get to and from them. This was an all-nighter that I pulled where I just couldn't sleep because it was too cold. So I was up right at the crack of dawn to take a photo. It's on a little tiny lake. This is some of you might know Dusan Sudek of Canoe Kayak Nova Scotia. This is a trip that he took, and this is on South Lake. And this is an aerial photograph of South Lake here. So you can see like it's a lot like much of Nova Scotia where you can see that the area has been clear cut. It's got a history of clear cutting. It's kind of the patches in between, like you can see on this peninsula, it's largely deciduous dominant and quite intact. And you kind of have these pockets here and there. This is one that we assessed and did determine is true old growth forest. So it's kind of these patches here and there that just kind of suffer from fragmentation, but are extremely special altogether. This is Big St. Margaret's Lake in the background here, and these two islands are both part of a very long pending expansion to Pinoak Lake Nature Reserve. And both of them have very old forests, as well as the shores of St. Margaret's Lake in general. We found some areas where the oldest hemlock we found was 406 years old, and lots of really nice stuff around Big St. Margaret's Lake as well. And this is actually from those efforts. These are sampling efforts that we did in 2022 around Big St. Margaret's Lake. This is one of my students at that time who was helping me do some of the old forest assessments and scoring. This is a yellow birch that with them, you can kind of see once they start no longer really being identifiable easily as yellow birch, when they kind of start to get, I call it cranky, and just very figured, very flaky, and start to be kind of no longer yellow at all. And just kind of a size comparison for just how large this tree was. I asked her to stand behind it just to kind of show the true scale of it. A lot of giants around there. This is Pagwa Lake, one of my favorite spots in the area. This peninsula has really nice old growth red spruce forest on it. It's very intact. There's never been, as far as I can tell, it's not just old growth, but probably never been harvested. It's got kind of like a wetland here at the base that just made it so that it wasn't really going to be accessible to access. And then it's got most of the trees are kind of not over 200 years old, but I don't think it's super likely that they were harvesting much before that. So it's probably just been subject to some kind of disturbance in the past, but relatively accessible. It's only about maybe 6 kilometers north of the 103. So an area that you can get to a little bit more accessibly. And this is the site where we documented this tree on the far right is the one that was 406 years old in Eastern Hemlock here. And you can just see one of my students here in the background, again, showing kind of the scale of these things. It's always difficult to kind of tell with these photos, but hopefully that just kind of sends. She's not a super small person either. She's probably about like 5'10" or so. So just to kind of give scale of that. And again, this is what I was saying about like where hemlocks either seem to get very gray or very orange when they get very old. This is another photo of South Lake, which is one of the most interesting lakes in the Ingram River watershed. Really fun lake to explore. It's kind of shaped like a saxophone. It kind of has like a mouthpiece and then curves down and then curves back up again. It's really interesting shape. And this is the oldest documented forest in the Maritimes. This is one of my colleagues here in the background as we were doing some assessments, and some of you might be familiar with northern coral lichen. It's one of my favorite old growth indicators, and it was everywhere around here. And I've started to, in the same way that you can have a bit of a correlation between how much shade off there are of the lower limbs for the shade tolerant species, the greater the concentration of northern coral lichen is pretty much a guarantee that it's a super old tree. I've yet to core a tree with northern coral lichen on it that's under 100 years old. They're pretty much always old. And then the higher the concentration, and then especially the higher up the trunk the lichen goes, it seems like the more of a guarantee that it's a super old tree. Here's some more photos of that forest. Again, the oldest forest documented in the Maritimes. Oh, it's under the old forest policy, which doesn't count for protection. It's not legislated. It can be changed right now, they could close it with the stroke of a pen, without doing any public consultation, so it doesn't count towards provincial or federal protection. I know that they are in the process of kind of trying to see if they can make that work. I'm a little leery of that because, if it could happen, yeah, without public consultation, then I would never see it as being formally protected, so we'll see. Yes, right now it's under the old forest policy, but not under actual, what I would call protection. If you will give nature enough of a kind of return to what it's supposed to be, then it'll be resilient, but we just need to kind of stop continuously hammering at it and give it the what it needs to flourish a little bit more than we have been. So I think it'll be really long term. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to be like, all right, now we're done. The river is restored. I think that'll be probably an ongoing project that we're just going to be committed to as long as we're an organization.
Do you do any management of these forests? I see you have some leaners there. And when I have any leaners in my little bit of woodland, I try and get them down to the ground because I'm concerned about fire possibilities. So
So is the question, do we actively manage the forest to reduce forest fire hazard risk?
Yeah.
Not so much. I'm this is not something that we kind of have the authority to do, but even if we did, I'm kind of a believer and follower of with the Wabanaki Acadian forest ecosystem. I made that sound as though it was a faith-based thing, but it's a science-based thing. Our forest ecosystems are not driven by natural disturbance regimes based in fire. They're by wind, are the major natural disturbance regime. So I think if you're doing it through a lens of restoring Acadian or Wabanaki forest ecosystems, then that's a good thing. But I think it's not something that we need to overly worry about kind of fire mitigation kind of as a separate entity. Our forests are relatively fire resistant when they're in their natural state. The problem is that we have a lot of forests that are not really in that state. So any kind of restoration efforts, I think, are more or less going to be achieving some of those fire mitigation efforts, but should be done through that lens instead of kind of purely about fire mitigation.
Is there any chance that salmon can adapt to the degree?
Or sorry, for those at home, the question was, is there an ability for the salmon to adapt to kind of poor pH quality levels and just to kind of just live with it? I think trout, is my understanding, are a lot more adaptable than salmon. They've got much of a higher threshold and they can kind of take some of those extremes as long as they're not consistent. I think in the Ingram system, the issue is more temperature than it is pH. And unfortunately, you kind of get into a feedback cycle where warmer water is more susceptible to the lowering of the pH, is more susceptible to warming, and then it just kind of built on itself like that, unfortunately. So a lot of our efforts in the future, and then what we're doing this year is to go through on a really micro level and identify the cold refugia, and then intensify our efforts in those areas to make a lot more fine filtered physical restoration efforts to kind of expand those as much as possible and create that much more digger logs, that much more pooling, and to make it kind of just refugia that they can apparently kind of punch through to get to those spots, but they do need the refugia where it is deeper, it is a higher pH, and it does have the ability to provide kind of exactly what they need. They can push through the poor areas, but they can't kind of be there for long. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for listening. As I say, please write any kind of emails or letters to support this or others across the province. It definitely is something that's very people driven. So I hope you consider supporting and engaging with that process and making these things happen. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mike. Wonderful talk.
Thanks very much, Mike. Your many years at this and your broad experience really show. There's a lot of depth of knowledge and a lot, you can see you've really put a lot and understandings here. And I like how it really, you know, when you're asked a question, there's just a whole other realm of knowledge you can draw on there. So it's really impressive to see you see the results of what you put into this, for so long.